So on Saturday, somewhere in Elektrostol, a Moscow suburb, a warehouse worker is clocking in for an early morning shift. But by the time the sun has gone up, the building he was working in is gone. 8 people are dead, 62 injured, and smoke rising 50 kilometers into the sky over a city that was supposed to be 400 miles from Putin's war. Now, this warehouse wasn't a military base. It wasn't a refinery. It was Wildberries, or Russia's Amazon, a platform that processes over 4 million orders every single day. The place where tens of millions of ordinary Russian citizens order their everyday, ordinary lives. And Ukraine hit it deliberately, explicitly, and with a message that every Russian consumer understood immediately. But this is what I wanted to get into today, because the strike itself is only half the story. The other half is what happened next and what will be happening further on from now, in Russian living rooms, in Russian supermarkets, and of course, in Putin's mind, in the Kremlin's response. All of that revealing exactly about where this war is heading.
This is The Global Gambit.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Now, for months, Ukraine's deep strike campaign has followed a clear and consistent logic. Hit the refineries, hit the fuel depots, and degrade the infrastructure that generates the revenue and refined products, keeping the Russian war machine running. That campaign has been extraordinarily efficient, rationing across 17 different regions, a fifth of Russia's refining capacity just offline. Fuel queues stretching across a country that sits on some of the world's largest oil reserves. Now, Saturday broke that pattern because Wildberries is not a refinery. It is Russia's largest online retailer. Founded in 2004 by Tatiana Kim, a celebrated entrepreneur whose personal wealth Forbes has valued at over $8 billion. Now, as a company, it delivers over 4 million deliveries each day, making the overall net worth of the company valued at $12 billion. This is essentially Russia's equivalent of Amazon, and Ukraine struck 2 of its largest logistics hubs on Saturday, 300 to 450 miles inside Russian territory, 8 people losing their lives and 62 more being injured. This is the deadliest attack, period, on Russian soil in 2 years. Now, and this is perhaps an objection some people may already be forming, was this a legitimate military target or a civilian one? Well, Ukraine's answer was pretty specific. Zelensky said that the warehouses were being used to store and distribute sanctioned drone components and navigation equipment destined for the Russian military. A Ukrainian security official went further. Wildberries' own website had been actively used by Russian volunteers to purchase walkie-talkies, body armor, and drone components for the front. Not occasionally, systematically. Now, the line between civilian logistics and military supply chain has been deliberately blurred by Russia itself. And if Russia chooses to use its own civilian infrastructure for military purposes, that infrastructure becomes a legitimate target. And that's without going into the limitless amounts of indiscriminate targetings by the Kremlin across Ukraine on a daily, weekly basis. But Ukraine was also making a different argument here, and one that goes beyond the military justification. Russia has been systematically striking Nova Poshta terminals, Ukraine's equivalent postal and logistics network, since the beginning of the year. Now, workers have been killed, shipments have been destroyed, and distribution hubs from Luhansk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and more hit repeatedly. So Ukraine has watched its own Amazon equivalent burn again and again, while Russia called it a military necessity, and the Kremlin called it a legitimate operation, SMO. Now, on Saturday, Ukraine said, well, therefore, so is yours. Now, the Kremlin has immediately called this terrorism, which is a remarkable word for a government that has been striking Ukrainian postal workers for 6 months and the entirety of the country for 4.5 years, or the entire conflict for the best part of 14. Ukraine noted the irony publicly, and the exchange tells you everything about how both sides understand what Saturday actually meant. But here is the strategic problem Saturday created for Moscow, because it goes considerably deeper than 8 deaths and a burned warehouse. Russia has spent 4 years maintaining a single crucial domestic narrative. The SMO, or Special Military Operation, is happening somewhere else. It's on your TV, not on your doorstep. Your fuel might cost a little bit more, your relative might not come home yet, but your daily life, your deliveries, your shopping, your sense of normality is completely undisturbed, and this is all for the greater good of Mother Russia. But the fuel queues cracked that narrative. The drone strikes visible from Moscow apartments and the windows cracked it even further. And Saturday cracked it in a place the Kremlin cannot easily explain nor hide. The place where ordinary Russian citizens do their shopping. And ordinary Russians understood that very quickly, because within hours of the strike, reports emerged of panic buying across Moscow. Supermarkets seeing unusual spikes in purchases of basic goods, people hoarding. It's like COVID, not because Wildberries destruction would actually empty shelves. The company processes those millions of dollars a day. But two houses going down does not collapse a supply chain, but because of the psychological signals associated with it. This war is here right now, and it is on your doorstep. It is in the infrastructure of daily life. And if it can reach a Wildberries warehouse 50 kilometers from the Kremlin, it can reach anywhere. Interestingly, the founder, Tatiana Kim, issued a statement calling Saturday's events terrible for the company and her country. The company simultaneously announced it was paying out $25,000 to the families of each person killed and $12,000 to those injured. So that's $25,000 for the loss of someone's entire life. At Russia's most celebrated consumer company, founded by one of the most important celebrities and effective oligarch miners in the country, that's how much they value a Russian life. So that number tells you something about how Russia looks at the ordinary citizens outside of not just the front line, but even when the war is coming home. Now, the deeper problem for Moscow is structural, of course. Ukraine has now demonstrated that Russian civilian logistic networks, which Russia has been using to move sanctioned military components, are as vulnerable. Every warehouse that moves drones or drone parts alongside consumer goods is now a potential target. Russia cannot harden all of them, and the choice it faces, stop using the civilian networks for military supply or accept that they will be struck, has no clear answer. But before continuing, I'm curious what you guys think about this. How did you react? What did you feel when you saw the image, the footage of the smoke plumes and the chaos across Russia yesterday morning? And if you find conversation analysis like this valuable, then do subscribe. I promise not to be sensationalist or hysterical, just straightforward and to the point. But back to the video. So we didn't have long to wait for Russia's response, and it was pretty typical. Their response came with 50 ballistic missiles this morning fired at Kiev, one of the largest barrages of the entire war, but nothing different because Russia has very little options left. Now, the number does tell you everything you need to know how much Saturday's attacks stung, though. You do not fire 50 ballistic missiles at a capital because you are unconcerned. You fire them because you are furious, because something hit you where it hurts, not on the battlefield or a military installation, but in the place that ordinary Russians recognize and depend on. And you need to answer it with the loudest possible countermeasure. You need to demonstrate that you are in control of the situation if you're Vladimir Putin. The problem for Russia is what happened next, though, because previous barrages of this scale have been devastating. Ukraine, running desperately low on Patriot interceptor missiles, have been watching ballistic missiles get through. 2/3 of them finding their targets, killing dozens at that time. Now, that specific crisis was part of what drove the commitments made at the NATO summit in Turkey last week. The Patriot license, the 2-year financial commitment, the accelerating integration of Ukraine's defense industry into the alliance as a contributor, not a recipient. This time, residents of Kiev reported something different, though. There were multiple interceptions. The air defense network, bolstered by the commitments accelerating after Ankara, held better than it has in months. Now, one person did lose their lives and 2 people were injured, real damage, real tragedy for those affected. But thankfully, and proportionate to what we've seen in the past, a fraction of what the barrage this size could have produced even 6 months ago. Now, Russia fired its largest missile attacks in months to punish Ukraine for striking a warehouse. Ukraine's improving air defense turned it back. That is not the exchange Russia needed nor expected. And this exchange tells both sides, and every observer like us watching, exactly where the military balance is shifting, where that momentum is moving. But then zoom out from Saturday's specific strike and look at what Ukraine is doing simultaneously across all of these operations, hitting the refineries that produce the fuel Russia needs to fight, hitting the logistics networks that move sanctioned components to the front. Simultaneously, though, on the same day as the Wildberries strike, hitting an oil depot in Noginsky, 50 kilometers from Moscow, and so continuing that energy campaign without pausing for the consumer campaign. And now hitting the symbols of Russian civilian normality, this warehouse where you order your package, you platform that processes all those orders a day that the Kremlin has been using to maintain this fiction that life continues completely fine. Zelensky calls Ukraine long-range sanctions plan. The language is very deliberate here. Sanctions are not designed to win wars immediately. They are designed to raise the cost of policy until the policy becomes unsustainable, to get that behavioral change. Ukraine is applying that logic kinetically. One refinery, one fuel depot, one warehouse at a time. So Russia's strategy for winning this war has always depended on two things: outlasting the West's willingness to support Ukraine and maintaining enough of that domestic stability to absorb the costs of fighting indefinitely. Ukraine is systematically targeting both of those assumptions simultaneously now. The Western coalition is not just fractioning, it's strengthening. It is deepening and a renewed sense of purpose for NATO. And domestic Russian stability? Well, it's eroding in ways that are now visible not just in the economics, but in those fuel queues, in the smoke above Moscow, and in Russians panic buying in supermarkets because their Russian Amazon burned 400 miles away. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, I like to remind us that Putin has premised and platformed himself as the protector, the provider of Mother Russia, of Father Russia, as the person who would help restore the greatness, the great resurgence of Russia in light of mistreatment by others or the dissolution of the Soviet Union. But everything that we see on a daily basis occurring within Moscow, across the country, is evidence to the counter, that this man is losing control of the situation. And whilst there are ongoing protests and concern over the Ukrainian government's approach, it is part of democracy. It is part of a country that has the capacity to even humor such grievances or concerns by its citizens, whilst Vladimir Putin simply suppresses them and outright treats his people, the Russian people, like garbage. And it's my goal here to bring to you a unique perspective, being half English, half Russian, on that set of issues. And if you enjoyed that, then of course, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.